Hello everybody! Welcome to our second video for the summer writing for adults. Today we're going to talk about setting and plot. The setting is where and when the story takes place. Most novels have more than one setting, of course. Usually an author decides to have one large setting. For the books I write, I've created an entire fantasy world, so that's my large setting. And then they have a lot of smaller ones, in a more modern novel it'd be like the laundromat or classrooms that they attend class in and things like that. One thing about settings is that they serve as more than just a backdrop for your story. They also help set the mood for your story, which is a huge thing. All of the mysteries and things that you like to read would not be nearly as interesting or dark and exciting if they took place in the middle of the day, if they didn't have those mysterious
The setting
settings.
really becomes a character in and of itself, too.
It does, it does.
So the mood is the feeling of the novel and the emotional quality of the novel. And it can also be described as how you want somebody to feel when you read the novel. And again, that goes back to the setting kind of being like a character, what we were talking about last week. Here's an example. A one-eyed crow blinked from the branch of a dead tree in the yard while a three-legged dog howled at the moon. So this sentence makes us feel dark and creepy things and shows the reader that the novel is supposed to be scary without having to tell them directly. So again, it sets the mood for your story. So be sure to include details such as sounds, sights, sensations, and maybe even smells of the settings that you choose. Try to write some example settings just as you're kind of getting yourself into the writing process. Settings for creepy, settings for something joyous, some suspenseful or tense moods. So try to make up some more moods and write a description of the setting that might go with that mood. And you can create any kind of mood you want, but I think it's really important to just get into that writing process to do examples, even if that mood is not exactly going to be in the novel that you have in your mind. It's just a good exercise to go through.
It's always helpful to practice and learn how to do that kind of thing.
Absolutely.
Sometimes when you write a setting, the setting that you introduce a character in, or the setting that they reside in most, can really be a reflection of that character's personality. Some kind of cliche examples, mysterious characters living in a mansion up on the hill,
Right.
and the only time you visit them in the novel is at night and things like that. It's kind of a cliche example, but a musician, having a music room, if you introduce a character in a room that has instruments and speakers, microphones, things like that, then without saying anything, you've already told the audience, this is a musician.
Right.
So that's a really good thing to practice so that you don't have to come out right and say, that a character is, this kind of personality or this is their profession. It's a great way to convey that without actually having to say it.
All right, in this section, we're going to talk about introducing the plot, methods for creating the plot in your novel. So there's just a few methods we're going to go through. Method 1 is called jot, bin, and pants. All right, number 1, jot down your scene ideas. So you could use index cards or notebook pages. Jot down every single scene that comes to mind using just a few words. You can take different paths on purpose to see what happens and write down some scene ideas, even if they contradict each other. Write until you have about 50 to 100 scenes, depending upon the length of your story. So that's jot. Number 2 is bin. So you're going to sort ideas based on where they should go in your story. It's kind of like talking about organizing your room, Put the things in different bins where they go. Group scenes into the beginning, the middle, and the end in your story. And don't throw any scenes out yet. Add them to like a maybe not pile. So it's like keep, donate, and toss away.
Yeah, right.
But you don't really toss it away yet because you're still going through your organization.
And there's a huge thing, when you're coming up with scene ideas, there might be one that doesn't fit in the, the chronological order of your story, but there are flashbacks or, dreams, memories, anything like that, that those scenes that you might have tossed out, you can still utilize somewhere else.
Right. And so then you go and you organize your scene. This is the pants section. You put scenes in a more specific order. What makes sense to you? Trust your gut in this part because you're the one that's going to be telling this story. But if you realize a scene is missing, then you just add it in. And eventually your goal is to have a list of scenes in the order that they might happen in your story. And one of the things when we were talking about this Jot, Ben, and Pants, we had Emily St. John Mandel here speaking. She wrote Station 11. And one of the things that she mentioned either in her presentation or answering a question about how she keeps all the characters and the things that are happening to each character together is she creates like an Excel spreadsheet.
Oh, yeah.
And puts the characters and the things with each one and tries to keep the scenes. And so she can just kind of make sure that she's touching on that or she knows where the character has been, where they're going. So you can actually use anything really, but a very well-known author uses a spreadsheet.
The second method that we're going to talk about is the plot roller coaster. That's something that, a lot of people learn when they're in elementary school. It's the very basic way to outline a story. And so you guys might recognize something like this. It's just like a roller coaster. So you start with the setup over here. And that is just going to show a little bit of the story and the characters. It gives you a hint of the kinds of things that you'll see later in the novel. It gives you a hint of the struggles and things like that. And it just gives you kind of a quick look around and see what kind of ride you're on.
Okay.
And then as you move up, you're going to have the inciting incident. And that's what launches the character into their adventure. It might be, something that forces them to make a decision to change, go on a different path. But once it happens, once you hit that point, there's no going back. You're on the ride, you're going up the hill of the roller coaster.
Right.
You're not getting off now.
The clicking noise.
Yeah. And then also in the same kind of area here is the rising action. So that's just as it continues to go up. This is where the characters are going to develop and deepen their relationships. It's what that's where you're going to lay out everything that's happening going up to the climax. It's the biggest hill on the roller coaster, and it's right before your novel really gets suspenseful. And so the higher you go, the more suspenseful it is. And then you get to the very tippy top of the hill, and that's the climax. It's the moment where when you read the climax part itself, you gasp. If you get a really good author, or you're watching a show that's really good or a movie, you have that moment where you just go, like
Right.
But it's the very top, right before the drop down. It doesn't last very long. In some novels, it's as short as one paragraph. But that one paragraph changes the whole story,
Right.
Complete shift of direction. But you want to just make sure it's enough to make your audience think, what is going to happen next?
Right.
And then you have the falling action here. It is fast-paced and action-packed. This is where you're going to explore, does the antagonist get defeated? How does your character prevail? How do they succeed in their journey? Do their dreams come true? And then as you come down this way, you get to the resolution, which is just how things work out in the very end. You're wrapping up all your little odds and ends, and you're going to want to show how the characters' lives have changed over the course of the story.
And I think you'll see in some novels that where the author is maybe thinking about having a second and a third, and it's part of a series. even though that story may have some resolution, there's still maybe some lingering things out there that you just think, okay, what about then? You
Right.
know? And of course, their goal in that is to keep the story going again through another novel.
Right.
But that can be a little bit leaving that cliffhanger for a reader. You're just like, no,
It can
I
be
want to know,
frustrating.
I want to know. But then it's like, okay, I got to wait for this next book to come out
Yeah.
because I got to know where this other, issue is going to resolve,
Yeah.
if it ever resolves.
If it ever resolves. But it's important to know that, your novel's going to be more complicated than this.
Right.
You're going to have multiple hills,
Yes.
but this is just a very simple
Right.
little visual
All right.
for you.
The third method that we're going to talk about is called the plot dot. Okay, so you've got the ordinary world, and I guess that's whatever world you've created within the course of your novel.
Yeah, it's kind of what a normal day in the life of your
Okay.
main character looks
Right.
like.
So their friends, their family, their job, those kinds of things. And then think about what flaws do they have? What is missing from their life? What do they want more than anything? What's sort of driving them through the course of this story? Then you've got the ordinary world. Then you have the inciting incident. So this is something big that changes throughout the story and whatever kicks that story into action. Do they accept the call immediately? Do they ignore or deny it and go back to their normal, ordinary world? Then you have the first plot point. So this is kind of the point of no return. So everything changes. There's no going back. How does the situation then escalate through that first plot point? And what forces your main character to then have to choose the direction that they go? So you got the first plot point, and then you have the first pinch point. And this is the major interaction where your antagonist, major interaction with the antagonist of your story in some form. And we talked about the antagonist and the protagonist in an earlier video. So you think about what happens if your main character fails to defeat this challenge at the end of the story. What is at stake?
Yeah, it kind of introduces, the concept of, what the character wants, but now at this point, this is the antagonist and this is what is at stake if the character doesn't succeed.
Right, and the antagonist has something driving and motivating them as well. So you have to keep that in mind as you're writing things out. What is their motivation? What are they putting up at stake? What's driving them? And then you go to the midpoint. And that's a shift from your main character being a victim in whatever situation to being a warrior in that same situation. So they're facing new challenges. They're on the defensive. They're reacting. They're waiting. Making things worse sometimes. They go down a path and then it's like, that's not working. Scratch that.
They kind of realize that the mentality, the way that they're dealing with the situation isn't, it's not helpful, and it's just making it worse.
Right, and a lot of mystery novels, and these points don't have to occur just in some sort of suspense thriller. I mean, I know a lot of this terminology kind of make you think, well, I'm writing a romance novel, I'm writing a, fill in the blank, but these still can happen, it's just on a different level. So then somewhere through the novel, something shifts their perspective. And it may be in a romance where this person has a particular person enter their life and maybe that person is great for them, but they don't get it yet, because they may have a preconception of this person, like if they're from a wealthy family and this person that's in love with them is not, and they have these preconceived notions that this person is up here and they're down here, but then something may happen to get them to see that they're just people trying to fall in love.
And it's worth fighting for.
Yes, and all of this sort of thing. So that can shift the perspective. So when you hear these things and when we're using this terminology, it doesn't limit you to
Not at
like
all.
some sort of suspense situation. It can be applied to anything.
Absolutely. So after the midpoint, you're going to hit the second pinch point, which is the second time that the character kind of confronts their antagonist. So it could be that when they did that shift into a more aggressive, mindset, it could be that the plans that they've made allowed them to encounter the antagonist, in one way or another. In the romance example, they might go to their love interest's family and say,
Yeah, I
this
was thinking
is what
about
I
that,
want.
and then the family is like, what? You can't be in love with this pauper whatever person, because they're united in their love, and then the family becomes the antagonist because,
Right.
Right.
So this is going to lead to things being much worse than they were before. The stakes are going to increase. The antagonist is going to double down on their efforts against
Maybe they're
the main
like,
character.
we're cutting you out of our will.
Yeah.
You're going to be poor if you, go with this person. And yeah.
We need to write a book, Jesse.
I know, right? We've already mapped it out. Don't steal our idea. This is so never before groundbreaking. Love interest with family that's opposed to it.
But then you're going to hit the second plot point. And a lot of the times they refer to this as the dark night of the soul. This is where the main character is completely beaten down. They're defeated. They're like on the borderline of giving up. Everything that they have worried about happening has kind of happened at this point. They've lost the battle either because of a flaw that they've had that we saw all the way back in the beginning, or because they lack the knowledge of how to overcome their struggles. So they're kind of, like I said, they're kind of about to give up all hope and kind of accept that things aren't going to work out. But then something is going to force them to change their mind. And so just like the antagonist doubled down in the last plot, in the last step, the main character is going to double down and they're going to push even harder. At this point, usually the character has like a realization about themselves or about their situation, or they get a stroke of genius, and with this knowledge, they kind of rise up and they try one final time, the last gambit. And you need to think about how that changes their plan of attack, how it's going to change how they're going about handling the issue, and you really need to make sure that the readers understand what that revelation is.
Okay. So that sets up this last revelation for like the final battle, right? So with this new knowledge that they have, and maybe a pep talk from close friends, because that's what I was thinking about when you were talking, in a lot of novels and movies too. When they reach that low point, then you may have a character that may have not been a fully, main part of it, but they've got this friend and this wise friend, and they kind of give them that pep talk to get them to continue on their journey and make this last push in their battle against their antagonist. And again, the antagonist can be a person, it can be a situation, it can be a place, whatever. But make sure there's a back and forth and that things do seem dark. It's not just like the next sentence, they get the pep talk and like, you're right, you're right, you're right, I'm going to do this. You have to get a little struggle in there to make it seem real,
The final battle needs to be, like you said, a back and forth, a give and take. And it needs, you need to make sure that the audience during this final push, this last struggle, you still want the audience to think, are they going to fail?
Right.
Are they going to lose? You still want that fear there, because otherwise your suspense is gone.
I mean, in a lot of books, you kind of know that it'll probably work out in the end, or else why write the book, right? But you still want to feel that tension toward the end, because that's going to continue to move the reader forward. If they just got to that sentence and it was like, yep, I'm going to do this, all right, and then the next sentence they do it, and then the end is kind of...
And then they get married happily ever after.
I mean, that's more of plot points, how, like, simple children's books work. You don't really go into all that detail.
Right.
But think about what the final conflict will be, what's going to be the most tense point of all of that, an exciting and drama-filled part of the story. And that's where thinking through all of those scenes in advance can really help you, and you've put them into the little bins or the little organizations so that allows you to see it. But you don't want to be married to that, because as you write, there's going to be more coming into your mind through, but you can always go back to how you've organized, whether it's the cards, that you have laid out, and add those in and see how it's all going to go.
Yeah. And then the very last part of the plot dot is the return to the ordinary world. And this is a big thing in any, in a lot of different genres, but especially in the genre I write, which I do fantasy. That's a huge thing is, your main character leaves their home, they go and do all these wonderful things, and then at the end it's always they return home and they see things completely differently. The world is a bigger place to them. It's like any of the hobbits returning to the Shire. I mean,
Right.
It's a very integral part, because you can see how the characters have changed over the course of the story.
Because you want to see growth, in the
Absolutely.
story. And that's what makes the story interesting, that they've learned something new or that sort of thing. And then if you have a novel that it's part of a series, they are going to leave that little lingering thing there, but still at the end, especially, I like to read about murders, the medical examiner or the cop, has a greater understanding of this other situation that may be pulling through all the books, so that then in the next book they're going to know more about this evil thing lurking.
They won't make the same mistake twice, kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah. But yeah, it's just really important to remember through any of these methods of plotting that it's all something that you can change.
Right.
Nothing's set in stone until you finish that final revision.
Well, and even then it wouldn't be. I mean,
Right.
yeah, final.
Yeah.
But final.
But it's important to be open to changing stuff around, especially if you get, writer's block and things like that. Being able to change that plot around can really just give you a new perspective on it all. You may cut stuff, you may rearrange it, but it's really important to play with the plot until it really resonates with you.
Well, and I think back to movies, because this can be a good examples of plots where that they've written out chronologically what occurs, But then to make the movie more interesting, and you've got flashbacks or you do it in reverse order, you still got to know what the order is before you might make that decision in terms of telling your story, to tell it in reverse,
Yeah.
So you can do that.
Absolutely. So those are just a few of the ways that you can work on plot. There are tons more, but those are three of the very, the main ways that you can go about it. We're going to link some more information in the description. There's a wonderful quiz that I found that, based on some questions that will ask you about how you go throughout your day-to-day life, it will kind of give you a suggestion as to which plotting method might suit your writing the best. Next week, we will be able to talk to you about dialogue and how to really flesh out your story with some good dialogue.
Awesome. Well, keep on working, and we'll be back with some more tips on writing for this summer.
All right. See you later.
Bye.
That's a typo. Are we? Is it crooked? Okay. Sometimes there are characters that can be. No.
Our the next method you should consider is called the plot dot, and so you think about.
Jackson-Madison County Library. This is Jessie. How may I help you?
Cut. I've read books.
I read.
What is the last one? Dialogue.